Evening, everyone. We welcome you all back to chapter 13 of the Youthful web series under the aegis of IRSI after a successful first physical IRSI meeting at Chennai. We are also very happy to share that we had our first international youthful session with the South Asian Academy of Ophthalmology conference last weekend. However, today's topic is the ultimate need of the hour, March to Zero End Ophthalmitis. After multiple case series of various hospitals getting into the limelight due to end ophthalmitis, it is important to understand the importance of diagnosis, correct treatment, documentation, and of course, the medical legal aspect of this. We aim at the end of the session to understand the importance of an end ophthalmitis case and how to prevent such circumstances in our practice because as we know it, it is the worst nightmare for any surgeon. Before we start with our session, we welcome our latest and newest IRSI president, Dr. Vinod Arora, to inaugurate the session. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. A warm welcome to all panelists, speakers, and viewers. As we know, infection can occur even in the best of hands, best of settings and situations in any surgery. But endophthalmitis is the most dreaded complication for ophthalmologists like us. But dear friends, it's not the end of road. While the prevention is the best option by following strict protocol and asepsis, the infection, if happens, it can be managed by timely intervention. The delay in early diagnosis and delaying management is responsible for poor outcome. Today, we have some of the greatest speakers who are going to share the knowledge with us and experience. So we welcome you all. Over to you, Dr. Pooja.
Thank you so much, sir. Can we have a past president, Dr. Mehta, for some encouraging words as well?
Thank you, Dr. Pooja. Congratulations, Dr. Vinod Arora, on the new hem of the affair of IRSI. Wonderful to see you there and great to meet you in person in the Chennai meet. Friends, this is such an important topic. We just read recently about the clustered endophthalmitis which happened in another city. Firozpur, is it, Ron? The recent endophthalmitis.
Muzaffarpur in Bihar.
Yeah, unfortunate. And I had said this to the media 20 years ago. The name of the institution will change. The name of the doctor will change. The name of the patient will change. But this will continue. And I had said this in no uncertain word to the media. And I keep telling a lot of patients because the moment this comes in the newspaper, a lot of patients come and ask us. I said, even if it is a Jallad doctor, Jallad, he will never be able to ruin 20 eyes or 15 eyes or 5 eyes. No doctor in his sensible mind ever wants to ruin a single eye. This is not a surgical complication. This is a systems problem. First of all, he's doing free of charge. He's gone to a camp. He's gone into an unknown circumstances, carrying his own equipment possibly. On top of which, he's not aware what sterilization has gone on, what has gone on there, whether the ward boy was drunk or not, and what is he facing. He has absolutely no idea that he's finished 50 surgeries or 100 surgeries on that particular day. And yet he's the first one to be blamed for botching up eyes. The word is extremely pitiful and sorry because they can't blame anybody else. When there is a fire in a building, the builder is caught and brought to justice. If there is a fire in the mall owner is got to justice and he's put behind bars. If there is a end ophthalmitis in a BMC hospital, friends, who should be the one who should be blamed? The municipal commissioner, the BMC chief. Unfortunately, no administration takes responsibility and it is passed on to the poor doctor for whatever reason. And that is the sad part that, we would like to work with this forum to see that bad name which the poor doctor undergoes without getting any money and the stress which he has to undergo and including putting behind bars. The surprising part was there was a fire in a Ahmednagar hospital and the poor resident was put behind bars. What in the world is going on in this world? And to help us medically that we don't get into trouble. And if it happens, we have an esteemed panel like Dr. Saurabh Luthra to tell us. Simultaneously, a very dear friend, Dr. Hitesh Bhatt, who has managed to be with us. He's a doctor by profession and he's very well versed with things. He minces no word. but he's a polymath. He's a dual personality, and he also is a great advocate and doesn't leave behind words. In Gujarati language, we call it Jalawadi or Kathiawadi. He is very good with his words, and he gives apt reply to the court wherever it is, and sees that the doctors are taken care of. What he says will be very important in an unfortunate evidence that something of this kind happens. What all things we should be doing immediately, how we can refer to our colleagues, share our responsibility, see that the patient does well end of the day, and what medical legal things can be done. Thank you for organizing such an important thing and making it very well balanced from every angle. All the best to you, Rohan, Pooja, and Shika.
Thank you. We kick off our session with our first speaker, Dr. Hitesh Bhatt. He has many degrees to his cap: MBBS, MD Gynac, LLB, and now an advocate and a medical legal consultant. He is the past chairman of Ethics and Medical Legal Committee, FOGDI. Currently, Dr. Bhatt is a medical legal consultant at various hospitals in Mumbai. He has his own website, consentfordoctor.com. We welcome him to the show to know more about how to save yourself medically, if at all, God forbid, you get into such a soup. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pooja and Himanshu Bhai, for nice words. I wish my wife would have heard this, so she will change her opinion about me. And with that, I must congratulate the organizers, because in Hindi movie or in any conference, the law comes last. But you have kept the law first, and that should be there in your practice. You have to keep the law first in your practice, and that will save you. So that is the first message I wanted to give you, how to save yourself from medical legal problems. Now, medical legal cases are constantly increasing. The things are good as long as it goes well with the patient. The doctor and patient relationships are like this. But minute something goes wrong and patient will start dancing on your head. Why this has happened and why this was not done. So many questions they will ask. So let us understand what is the definition of negligence. The negligence is defined as to do something which a prudent man in similar situation will not do. We are talking about medical negligence. So we can put it this way, that to do something which a prudent doctor in similar situation will not do. That is called act of commission if you do that. Like if patient requires a surgery on the left eye and you operate on the right eye, no prudent doctor will do the same. If you do that, you are negligent for act of commission. And second part is act of omission, not to do something which a prudent doctor in similar situation will do. That is called act of omission. So you cannot omit to do something, or you cannot commit something which a prudent doctor would have done or would not have done. Now the next query is, what prudent man or prudent doctor would have done? How the prudent man shall have acted? So that answer is very complicated, and that is what we have to explain it to the judge. And how we explain? The prudent man is nothing but a common man like R.K. Lakshman. There is no real prudent doctor or prudent man. It is just a hypothetical situation. And how we convince the judge that what prudent man or prudent doctor would have done? By various ways. If we show them that something is given in the textbook, then if your practice matches with that, you can say that your practice is a prudent practice or a standard practice. Prudent doctor would have done the same. If it is a practice in nearby medical college, and that is why the cases are referred to medical college by the court as well, to check whether your practice is a standard practice or not. If something is accepted by peers, if some doctor gives affidavit in your favor, you can prove it to the judge that you are a prudent doctor. And last but not the least, if something has appeared in an index journal, and if you prove it to the judge, then your practice will be considered as a standard practice. So when it comes to standard practice or a prudent man's practice, there are two more parameters which are taken into consideration. The expectation of standard of care are different from a GP and a consultant. So if a patient in your OPD gets heart attack and you are treating them, the expectation of standard of care from you for that particular thing is expectation from an MBBS doctor. You will not be expected to treat him like a cardiologist. And the place of treatment given. The place you are working, that also matters while deciding a case. If you are working at a small place, PHC level, or in a village setup, then you may not investigate patient to the extent which the doctor sitting at Mumbai is doing. So that also depends where you are practicing, the area of practice. So that is how the judge will judge you on the basis of all these parameters. Now there is a case from Tamil Nadu Consumer Redressal Forum, Miss Sujata versus R. Surya Prakash. What happened was there was watering, a pain in eye, corneal ulcer, and initially the culture negative for the fungus on corneal scraping. The second scraping was done, fungal infection was proved, and then the treatment was started. Now infection gone deep during that time, and patient lost the eye, and 9 lakh to 10 lakh rupees were asked. But the doctor gave reference from the textbook, and what reference they gave from this textbooks from page number 210, that antifungal treatment should not be initiated without laboratory evidence of the fungal keratitis. And the doctor said that I was waiting for it to come positive, and then only I started the treatment. So I have never delayed the treatment. It is the mandate in the book which said so, and it was considered that his practice was a standard practice, and the case was dismissed. So you have to find out some logic by from the books or journals or by affidavit, then you can prove your case in the court. Now, what is diligence? Diligence is the defense. Ultimately, diligence will save you. Now, diligence is not defined in the law. Diligence means absence of negligence, right? So to prove the negligence, three things should be there. There has to be a duty towards the patient. There has to be some damage to the patient, and there should be some relation between that negligence and the damage which you caused to the patient. Now, as far as the duty part is concerned, when patients are seen outside your OPD, there is actually no duty or there is no implied contract between you and a patient. My ophthalmology friend always tells me that wherever I go for some function, some marriage, somewhere, the patients do come to me and say, sir, ye aankh dekho laal ho gayi hai, ye aankh mein se pani ja raha hai. So they come to me. That type of consultation is not the real consultation. Those patients, even though suffer damage, cannot claim because there is no preview of contract between you and the patient. And when he told me this, I told my friend that this is the only advantage of being gynecologist. In a function, nobody will come to me ever like this. So that is what is preview of contract. There has to be contract between you, implied contract. There has to be some damage, and there has to be some negligence and relation between that negligence and a damage. Now, what are the defenses? One is mode of treatment. There can be different mode of treatment. Like you can cool the noodle by blowing it with your mouth, or you by putting a fan like this. Similarly, there are different modes of treatment. And if you adopt one of them, you are not negligent. Like for cataract surgery, there can be phaco or there can be extracapsular cataract extraction. You can do either of this. And if patient suffers some damage, patient cannot tell that why you did not do that procedure because I suffered this because you did phaco. That patient cannot do. And that is where the role of consent comes. You have to write the alternates in the consent. If you tell all the alternates to the patient and you choose one treatment and patient accepts it, it will be considered that patient has chosen that treatment. And that is why we have to mention all the alternates of the treatment in a consent. Similarly, for glaucoma, there are various therapies and you can choose any one which is proper for the patient. Now, error of judgment. Error of judgment is no negligence. See, if you see this slide, on the left-hand side, there are fake people. On the right-hand side, there are real people. Similarly, there can be error of judgment. See, this is also one more example of error of judgment. That can happen at Goa, right? This is error of judgment. Error of judgment can happen. And if you err in judging something, then you are not negligent. Only thing is, you have to apply your mind. So over a telephone, if you are suggesting something and then plead error of judgment, then court will not accept it. You have to call the patient, you have to see the patient, and you may do error of judgment because there are many conditions which mimic with each other, right? The red eye will have 1,000 causes. So you can err in that diagnosing that thing, but you have to see the patient and then you can plead error of judgment. Accidents can happen. And when everything is in your favor, you have chosen patient properly, your diagnosis is proper, investigation is proper, method of treatment is proper, and still something goes wrong, it will not be taken against you. And there is a case from White versus Board of Governors of Westminster Hospital. And what the judge said in that case, the surgeon was operating under a microscope and he accidentally cut the retina. So he said the surgeon accidentally cut the retina of the right eye during an operation. He was not held negligent for the accident because he was working under a microscope within few millimeters from retina with due care, and still it can happen. So that was considered as accident, and there are many judgments based on this judgment in India also, where if you can prove that everything was perfect and still patient did not get the result, it will be considered as an accident. Foreseeability. Foreseeability means a patient may get sometimes the delayed complications. Now, if delayed complications can be foreseeable because of your act or action or inaction today, they can claim it like delayed complication. If you have done something today, it may lead to, say, glaucoma afterwards. Even if it happens after 5 years, patient has a right to sue you because it is a foreseeable complication of the surgery done previously. But there should be relation between that incidence and the damage. Like there is a case of V. Krishna Kumar versus State of Tamil Nadu. You all must have heard about this case. There was a preterm child, oxygen was given for prematurity, and fundoscopy was not advised or not done. And later on, the doctor tried to make the doubtful documents by writing fundoscopy done and NAD and all. It was the forged documents were created. But the court said that when the oxygen was given to the child, the fundoscopy should have been advised. It was not advised. And when child suffered retinopathy of prematurity, it was held against the doctor. Even though it appeared after 2 years, the court said that in the present case, the onset of retinopathy of prematurity was reasonably foreseeable at the time when oxygen was given. So if late complication also, if it is related, and in this case, some few crore rupees were given to the complainant. So you have to be very perfect in your writing, in your suggesting the investigations, and in your making your case paper. Contributory negligence. Now, what is contributory negligence? When you advise something to the patient and patient do not follow it is called contributory negligence. And for that, it is a good defense. But for that, you must have documented the thing in your case paper. If you document it properly and still something goes wrong, then you can show it to the court that, see, I advised patient for this thing, but patient did not listen. And that will save you from the wrongful cases against you. Now, how to save yourself from medical legal problem? I have told you these are the defenses which we work, and there are many more which we make our defense on basis of all these things, and we present in the court. Now, there are certain do's and there are certain don'ts for medical legal problem. The first most important thing is law will never teach you medicine. Many a times I am getting questions from friends. Can I do this surgery? Can I give this medicine to the patient? Law books will never write anything about medicine. Understand that law hardly talks about law. How can it talk about medicine? It is always learned from our books. But medicine may teach you law. If you don't know the law, something will go wrong, case will be filed, and then you will start reading the books. So you should be thankful to the organizers that they have given you an opportunity to learn the law without having case filed against you. So you can avoid litigation by 3 things: communication, communication, and communication. And it is said that more you talk with your patient in your consulting room, less you will have to talk against them in the courtroom. And talking more in your consulting room with the patient will have same benefit which you get by remaining silent at home. The similar benefits. It will make other person feel empowered. It will avoid misunderstandings, and it will avoid the legal issues. Always take informed consent. Consent is altogether a different talk, but you must have procedure-specific consent, and you have to take proper consent, procedure-specific consent from the patient. Casual discussion of the treatment should be avoided. Although I told you that preview of contract doesn't exist in such situation, but it is better to avoid. Review the textbook and medical articles to remain with the current medical practice. You cannot give or prescribe something which is obsolete. Do not criticize other doctor or paramedical staff. take seriously patient suspicion and feeling. Whenever possible, follow their suggestion. If patient will say, sir, can I take second opinion from this doctor? Then don't say, वहां मत जाओ, वो तो मेरा junior है, मैंने उसको सिखाया है. Let them go, right? If they want to do that. Never give assurance about the results. A beauty can convert into beast and beast can convert into beauty in no time. If you tell that this patient will not survive and she may attend your funeral, that is what is our practice. So never give any assurance about the results. You have to tell that I am there for anything which will happen to you, but don't give 100% assurance for anything. Document everything, either by handwritten, typed, or computerized. Whatever way you want to document properly. We are very poor at record keeping. When we were juniors, we used to write operative notes that patient was taken inside the operation theater, painting, draping done, the doctor with cap, mask, gown, clothes on. Like that, we used to write operative notes. And when we become senior, cataract done. So that is the surgery notes we are writing. That is not allowed. Maintain your good habits. Visit your indoor patient and make it a habit to enter in your case paper. Never alter the records. Whatever you do, you cannot make tiger out of an elephant. And the judges are not doctors, but they are grandfathers of documents. They will immediately make out, immediately they will come to know that this is forged, this is written afterwards. The pen is different, handwriting is different. Sometimes we are taking signature on a blank form and we write below the signature done. Now nobody will do that. Who will write below the signature? Or we write in between the lines. If you are writing afresh, you will not write in between the lines. So do not do any forgery in the case paper. Good documentation is a good defense. Poor documentation is a poor defense. No documentation means no defense. You can be bashed like this in the court. Always examine female patient in presence of female nurse or female doctor. Practice within your limits. Do not try to do something which you can't do, right? And if you get legal notice, take medical, legal, and medico-legal advice. Because the general, these are my last few slides and most important message. Because all the lawyers, they may be having good name, but they are not having experience in medico-legal field. Suppose if I ask Himanshu Bhai to treat a cardiorespiratory arrest, he may not do it because in the best way, best possible way, because he is not expert in that. Similarly, we feel that he is Ram Jethmalani, but he doesn't know medico-legal thing. I'm just giving the examples. So what happened? There was a board, only 10 issues allowed, and one lady went there with only 10 issues. That is what happens with the lawyer. They don't understand our language. They don't understand our actions. Like in one case of cataract, there was a PC rent and the vitrectomy was done. And the lawyer was asking me, सिर्फ lens बदलना था तो फिर ये vitreous क्यों निकाले, ये surgery क्यों किया? They don't understand. The way this person doesn't understand. You see, this lady is in some other country and what she wants, you will come to know from her action, right? But that fellow did not understand it. That is what happens with the lawyer who don't understand our action also, that why we do so, why we have done so. And if you want to be 100% safe from medical legal problem, you can start your band, you can become photographer, you can join Bollywood, you can join some sadhu, or you can join Dawood gang. Ultimately, you have to run away and leave medical practice. Then you can be 100% safe from a problem. So I always tell, have fearless practice. You may learn some asana to diagnose your own piles, but you cannot get any way to be 100% safe from medical legal problem while being in a medical practice. My teacher used to tell me, if you do not perforate a single uterus, you are not doing enough MTPs. Similarly, I am telling you, if you do not get a single notice in your entire practice, you are having less patients. Try to increase your OPD, right? So do not panic. Do not keep concentrating on a problem which has happened. You may harm the other normal case. So do not let that thing also happen, right? If ever you need me, I will be just round the corner. And Justice Katsu has said, the law is a watchdog, not a bloodhound. If reasonable care is taken, doctor will not be held negligent. So doctors need not worry. So just continue your journey, not only walking, but dancing like this baby, and have stress-free practice. To have stress-free practice, you must practice to remain stress-free. Thank you very much for patient hearing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hitesh Bhai. As usual, very bold and to the point, no beating around the bush. Ragini ma'am, welcome to the show. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Himanshu, I would like to add one thing about the Hitesh. I have heard so many medical talks here, but I could understand only because all the presentations you have, all the photographs are so impressive that they used to teach without you telling anything. I have organized so many webinars on this medical aspects, Hitesh, you are really superb.
Sir, law
And
is
we
a
will
boring
keep your talk
subject.
in some, we will keep your talk in some other conference very soon.
Yes, sir, law is a boring subject. I used to
No,
sleep
sir,
myself
but
in the classes, so I made it interesting.
the way you are explaining your photograph, especially the Goa photograph, the very beautiful photograph, you enjoyed it. And second thing, one you told, accidental. Accidental means if you have cut the retina, you say, that we will discuss you somewhere on other platform in detail because time is short here. But this is really very good for doctors to know that they have to prove that this has been done accidentally, not intentionally. Not any lack of knowledge, but accidentally it has been done. So we have to prove in the court, because I have a case in the court that my lawyer was knowing nothing. I have to go and fight myself over the case, and I won the case. The judge told me same thing. The doctors are coming here, they don't, the lawyer does not know anything. Why don't you fight your case your own?
Sir, that is why I had to give my medical council registration back and become advocate. I was not bad gynaec, sir.
You are lucky,
it was just for the sake
you are
of
lucky to leave the doctor, and you are lucky to have an advocate. We are all planning to leave the medical profession.
Sudhanshu, he gave a good hint. If you don't want cases, stop medical practice. So, okay, one simple question, Hitesh bhai, without taking too much time of the panel. Is it mandatory for a private practitioner to have a regular checkup by somebody like you, whether we are following a prophylactic checkup, audit, sir, a medical legal audit?
Yes, that is what, sir, I am doing now. I am consultant to almost 100 hospitals, and we are doing medical legal audits regularly. And that is why I'm here in Hyderabad today for medical legal audits.
Very important. This is what I wanted to stress upon, that you can have a private practitioner also who can medical legal practice, whether my staff is following what is correct to be done.
Right, sir. Because documents only will save you. That's it.
So one question is, video consultation mandatory, or is it equivalent to having normal documentation and normal consultation?
Which video? I rather say that do not take video consent. Always go with the written consent, and whatever is written will be believed. If it is properly written and signed by doctor and the patient with two witnesses, it will be taken as a correct document in the court.
Oh. Sorry to ask again,
but can be from our hospital. Witness can be our staff.
Yes, anybody more than 18 years of age with sane mind can be a witness, sir.
Okay. Hitesh bhai, question was, this thing became very popular in talk shows now. Having a video consent for every patient undergoing surgery, and you are saying it's not mandatory. Very important, because where will you keep all the data? You don't know which one is going to create trouble in next 1 year. That.
Sir, that is why, see, in the court all across globe, the primary evidence is the evidence which is written evidence. The video consultation, or if it is mandatory by law, say in Organ Transplant Act, there are 3 acts at present where video consultation is mandatory by law over and above the written consent. That is research. When you want to do some research, and video consultation is must. On organ transplant, or video consultation is must. And in surrogacy bill, they have made video consultation compulsory. Otherwise, it is not. And the presentable thing which you can present as evidence in the court is the hard copy. So you have to stick to that. And sometimes video consultation will go against you. Second thing, video is admissible with the forensic examination of the video, because you can morph the video, you can change the video. So all these things are you have to do. So it is better you have a written, and that is what is admissible in the court.
Yes,
Dr. Ragini, please go ahead, because Hitesh bhai, you must be knowing Dr. Lahani and Dr. Ragini. All problems land up at their feet ultimately. So the final say, let's hear your point of view, ma'am. What is the right?
Good evening, Dr. Arora sir, who's the president. Hi, Himanshu bhai. Hi, good evening, Sudhanshu sir. Hitesh bhai, that was a wonderful talk. Hi, Saurabh bhaiya, Rohan, Pooja, thank you for the invitation. Dr. Anshika. Now, sir, it was a wonderful talk. I think where we land into problems while trying to solve the problems that doctors have, and then the consumer cases land up with us. So what you said about documentation is very correct. I just wanted to clarify one point about the witnesses, sir. I think, is it okay if the witnesses are all from one side? Because normally it is like this, that the witness has to be one person from the patient side, which is compulsory. It cannot be all our witnesses, sir, for consent.
The point
and
is,
the consent has to be in the patient's vernacular, as far as I know.
No.
And
let me tell you, because this is a talk on consent, but still I will tell you, I'll clarify these doubts.
Yes, sir.
First thing is the role of witness is any contract. See, consent is a contract. Supreme Court said in case of Samira Korli versus Dr. Prabha Manchanda that consent is a contract. First thing. In Contract Act, Indian Contract Act, the role of witness is to authenticate that I have seen this person signing before my eyes. That's it. Witness need not know what is written above. It is between you and the patient. That's it. Surrogate consent or consent of the major or any other person is required when patient is unconscious, patient is not of sound mind, or patient is minor. In these three situations, you require consent of guardian and not the patient. Right. And as far as the language of the consent is concerned, we have already written a last line in consent that this was explained to me in the language which I understand. But and NABH is asking, NABH has put this thing in our mind that it has to be in vernacular language. Now, if you print the consent in Mumbai in Hindi, Marathi, and English, what if a Tamil patient comes to you? What if Telugu patient comes to you? And if you make consent in all 25 Indian language, what if a Chinese comes to you? What if Japanese comes to you? Can't you operate? And if you make consent in 25,000 global language, what if illiterate person comes to you? Can't he enter into a contract? So the point is consent has to be, because there is a presumption in law, and that you have to tell to the judge. He may not know this, that if something is written and signed by a person who is of sane mind with more than 18 years of age, he is approving what is written above, because no sane person will sign on a blank form. You understand that? And if the language is a barrier, and I argued this in the court once, where they said that the consent language of the consent is different and patient might not have understood it. I said, sir, if you will allow this case, then I may lose this case, but I will be at benefit, because I will stop paying my EMI, because all forms I signed in Marathi and I am a Gujarati fellow. I will stop paying my electricity bill. I will stop paying my SIM card bill. I will stop paying, and I will send my wife home back, because the marriage certificate is in English. And I don't know, I have to keep my wife for entire life with me. So that is not the argument. See, if something is written and signed, it has to be believed. Otherwise, no contract on the earth will exist.
So everything should be in black and white. That will save.
It has to be written properly and signed by two people and signed by two witnesses. You show me one example where everything is proper and still the court said that this is not a valid contract. It is not valid on various basis. When you don't write, I, doctor dash, patient dash, operation dash, if you leave it blank, then court will say that when doctors do not have time to fill in the blanks, we have no reason to believe that this was explained to the patient. That is what the comment from the judge. So it has to be properly filled. That is required, yes. But otherwise, just because patient did not understand, that argument will not stand in the court.
Provided you have the right lawyer, sir.
Very right.
You have to, yes, you have to explain it to the judge.
Now, Rohan, you realize we'll have to call him for one full session for 6 hours.
Yes.
To clear our fundas, right from anatomy, physiology, biochemistry of the whole thing, and pathology, how the pathology happened in the medical legal part. Thanks, Hitesh bhai. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Rohan. Up to you.
Rohan?
Right, sir. So our next speaker, should we go ahead with the next talk?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So our next speaker is Dr. Satanshu Mathur. He is the director of High Tech Institute and Laser Center, Kashipur. He is the national convener of SSTC, taking it to higher highs at all national platforms. Sir is also the past chairman of the UK SOS and the chief national coordinator of the ISMICS Society. Sir will talk to us about March to Zero Endophthalmitis. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Dr. Virmudora, Dr. Himanshu, Dr. Ragini, and all Pooja, all everybody here. And thank you for keeping my talk after Dr. Bhatt talk, because now everybody will take it seriously. So can you hear me, Rohan?
Yes, sir.
So there, zero endophthalmitis means, does not mean zero. Means the importance is that the chances of endophthalmitis are minimized in your OT, in your area. So this is March to Zero endophthalmitis. And this is achievable just following this, keeping in mind 5 possible factors, alone or in combination. Patient personal hygiene, contaminated surgical supplies, faulty sterilization procedures. This is very common in endophthalmitis cases, inadvertent touch and environment. What are the preoperative risk factors that we have to take care? Blepharitis, conjunctivitis, the obstruction, recent immunosuppressive treatment. So we should have thorough preoperative clinical assessment of the patient. What investigation? What am I talking? This is under the AIL guidelines. If you mention this in the court of law, you are safe, because AIS are a parent body, and whatever AIS says, everybody has to follow, and judge has to accept it. Blood sugar less than fasting 120 and random less than 200, you are safe. You should not operate. Now there is no risk of operating every 220, but we should avoid it, because if something goes wrong, we cannot code in the code that is what it was allowed. Singeing should not be done on the same day it has to be done. What preoperative medication instruction to be the patient? Broad spectrum antibiotics 6 times a day before surgery and on date of surgery. Patient should come with face wash, hair with soap. Male should come with shave. They should wear the clean clothes. What instruction to the staff? If biometry has to be done on the same day, use immersion method to avoid contamination. If there are more than 5-6 cases, the OT, diabetic patient should be given preference. Preoperative patient is very important. Iodine 5% 2 times topically 5 minutes before surgery. It is good even if you do not have used antibiotic 1 day before. So iodine 5% 2 times is very important before surgery. We should clear all the brow region, lid margin with 10% iodine solution, and should change our clothes. Everything should be changed. That is street clothes. This is scrubbing is very important. This chart should be hanged over the scrub area, that they have to take this scrubbing for at least 5 minutes. If this is hanging over the scrub area, they will take care of it. If chlorhexidine, antiseptic soap, or povidone iodine liquid scrub should be done properly for 5 minutes. If you check, you go in the OT tomorrow, you see. You will to take care. Dipping is very important to prevent the infection, because it prevents the eyelashes coming in the operating area. So it should be done properly. This is a very important thing. Monitoring surgical supplies. Check expiry date, because you are not. There was a case in Delhi recently where expired lens was implanted in the patient eye. Patient attendant has seen this expiry date. Patient was well. Even then, doctor was penalized. Check clarity of irrigating solution for any suspected particle. We have seen in all the camps and all the OPD everywhere, this clarity of the solution is defective, means irrigating solution, lactate or BSS or any other, or we are using methyl cellulose. We should always check the clarity before using it, because most culprit lies in this area. Ideal is 1 irrigating bottle for 1 patient. Lot of discussion, but we request them to make a bottle available so that we can use 1 irrigating bottle for 1 patient. Phaco sleeve and tip should be changed after. Antibiotic is not very helpful. It has been already discussed. Subconjunctivitis given at the conclusion of surgery have been found to reduce risk. Intracameral injection we were not using previously, but Dr. Haripriya has come out with a long study of more than 18,000 patients, and there she has very clearly indicated that it is very helpful. So we have started using intracameral injection in every patient now. Watertight corneal incision is very important. If there is a complication like PCR, we should manage it effectively. We should not leave the vitreous in the antechamber. Explanation during surgery is very important. We should keep an eye on temperature, 134 degrees centigrade. And if you have no high-speed autoclave, then you should have alternate this adequate number of surgical sets with you. Autoclaving is very staff. I know so many staff, if you go and ask the staff, they are not knowing actually what they have to do. This is not the temperature only that is achieved 134. It is a time also. You should stay there for at least 30 to 40 minutes. Overfilling in the drum should be avoided so that the air can rotate all around the drum. Monitoring is very important. Temperature, pressure, cycle duration. a person should be there who should maintain a register. They should issue I have a register where attendance writing at the article was started, what time whistle started, and at what time the article was closed. Although my autoclave is fully automatic, but even then we note down. So the autoclave should also be weekly instrument, but we should clean the autoclave also for after every month for 25 to 30 cycles. And for this, the biological indicators are available. Chemical extraction is not recommended nowadays. Physical indicators are strips that we put outside the drum, but this tell only that this much temperature has reached, but does not clearly indicate that temperature has maintained there for 30 minutes. For this, we have chemical indicator. If temperature has maintained for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever is your autoclave says, it will show the vapor line or whatever indicator you are using pass. Only then you can use the instrument surgery, otherwise you should postpone the surgery. Biological indicator for autoclave, we have already discussed. Cleaning OT, remove the dust with a clean wet cloth. Do not do is not allowed in the OT. It will infect material all around and on the equipment. OT floor, trolley, everything should be cleared by bacillus solution or other alcohol-based solutions. Keep floor clean during the surgery. Do not discard soil, linen, and chrome on the operating theatre. Keep the floor dry when OT can use dehumidifier. 15 days you can recommend it. Fumigation of OT are nowadays not recommended because it is cancerous. Scrub we should clean the scrub sink almost daily, and AC filters should be checking care. Microscope, head, phacocortic instrument, they all should be clean. These are the cleaning procedures we are avoiding. Important, one has insisted me on speaking on model OT also, so I'm just giving brief introduction. Zoning is very important. What is the zoning? There are 4 zones: protective zone, clean zone, trial zone, and disposable zone. Whenever any newcomer is for youth, they are planning the OT, they should maintain these 4 zones. Protective zone is reception waiting area, clean zone is the pre-operating room, recovery room, sterile zone is the operating room, scrub room, and disposal zone is where we dispose the corridor, where we dispose of our used material. OT should be away from the public movement, and following features should have. Model OT is recommended but not mandatory in NABH. OT should have seamless walls, non-porous floor without corners, with antiseptic, antifungal paint. Doors should be always kept closed. Restrict the number of persons to minimize during surgery. Culture and sensitivity very important. We should take sample from floor, wall, OT table, AC, phaco machine, and should keep recording the data. But we'll agree that we should maintain an autoclave register. We should every month we should get the sample done and should in court of law. In addition, every OT should have air handling unit that should be separate for that OT, and no split of window AC should be allowed nowadays. Air exchange per hour, OT is maintained at 20 cycles per hour, where fresh air component should be minimum 4. This is air velocity, air filtration. HEPA filter is very important. That can save 99.9% down to 0.3 micron any bacteria and virus. Temperature, humidity 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, humidity 40 to 60%. And fans are not used in the OT. Positive pressure is very important. We should have gauge. I have a meter outside my OT, which tell me my outside pressure is minimum 4 to 5 Pascal more than the interior pressure, so that the outside air will not enter the OT whenever the door is open. So there a meter outside the OT room. Maintenance is very important. We should have validation system every year from third party that will also save you in the court of law. Who will maintain temperature, air particle count, air exchange. I have a report of 12 pages with me, and that is to be done every year. Water tank, nobody take care of the water tank. Water is important reservoir of microorganisms. We should have separate water tank for OT, and we should clean it once in a month. Normally what happens is there are water tank for all the OT operation theater, all the hospital, common water tank, and nobody take care of it. We should have separate water tank and we should clean it once in a month. We should have daily checklist for IoT like this. Who checked the periodic check? Who checked the autoclave register? Who filled the drum? This all things should be noted and signed by a OT assistant. This is important. Important in the sense that person who is responsible for the OT will be think twice before skipping anything, because no doctor is going to check it and sign it. It should be signed by him. Any document is signed by attendant, he will always be conscious. Who did preparation before I have a surgeon? So all these things should be documented. Who did cleaning, mopping before leaving in the OT? Who cleaned equipment? Everything should be noted and signed by a OT assistant and signed by the doctor. This is a weekly checklist. Who checked the medicine check, expiry date? Who checked the OT list? Who submitted autoclave report? Cleaning done on Saturday or not? This should be weekly list. Which instrument who cleaned? What was cleaned autoclave? Who done it? So this should be art in the OT register. Outside the OT should be held, and the OT in charge should take care of it. Expiry date of medicines will always be checked every week. This is a monthly checklist. Who took the source sample culture from the wall? OT is AC cleaned or not? Did in charge check the washing of OT on last Saturday? Iris stock report completed or not? So this thing should be monthly. So I say, who cleaned the drum? So this thing should be signed by the OT attendant, OT in charge, and this should be also signed by the doctor. This will make them aware of the thing they have to do. So if you do all these things, take all precaution, you can have a zero endophthalmitis, and you should smile on your patient face, and will save you from the court of law. You will not need the help of the doctor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was an in-depth analysis of how we should keep our operation theaters and how we can save ourselves. Dr. Saurabh, sir, any comments?
I think very valid points and all of those, and it's a very nice overview, and also giving the details of all the things which we have to maintain on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and so many things which we actually overlook. And like cleaning of water tanks and all, which those are some things which you will do when you're going for NABH inspection, but you must realize that we have to take this on a daily basis, and take it very seriously, because we don't want to land up with a cluster endophthalmitis or anything like that, which can be very bad for our practices. So I think very nicely covered by Dr. Sudhanshu Mathur, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Ragini, ma'am.
I think it was a perfect presentation. He had to finish it in 10 minutes. So, but every line, if you read and follow it like a Bible, then it comes to a very correct OT. And like what Saurabh Bhaiya was saying, that water cleaning and all is not taken. But I know that, like we investigate cases and all that. So we also maintain water cleaning registers. We also maintain autoclave registers. I have to sign the autoclave book before I go in. So like Dr. Bhatt was saying, that these documentations, which when they are not available, they are the problem, because, I'll tell you, 20 years back, we were doing our first camp at Kolhapur. That was the first time we were preparing the OT. We had not even gone for a camp. So that was a site visit, and there was no water coming, and sir was visiting and it was blocked. So sir said, "Main dekhta hu." So he tried to open it, and somebody was there, and out came out a can, a big mass, a blob of worms. So where the tank was never clean. So had we not done all this before preparing the OT, and it was in a proper hospital. So important points, and it was really good, but every line is important. So he had to finish it in 10 minutes. So as always, Sudhanshu Bhaiya he rocks.
Thankfully, we have all these presentations archived on YouTube, so you can keep going back and listening to it again and following it protocol wise.
This is the advantage of the webinars.
Yes. Ma'am and sir, do you just wanted a quick question? Like when we are washing our hands for washing up, any particular kind of water is required, or regular tap flowing water is fine?
So we basically, many places, because where the water is not correct or anything hard or anything, AquaGuard water is used. So we are using AquaGuard water to clean our instruments and all that. And normal water is used, and that is why the tank cleaning, the water checking is very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. I think RO water is what we use, and I think that's what is recommended.
Okay.
Sir, you're on mute.
You're on mute. Sudhanshu sir, you're on mute. Sir, you're on mute. I think
so. You're muted. So you're muted.
I agree with Saurabh. We are also using this RO water, but you can use AquaGuard water also. Important thing is how much time you're giving for scrubbing. Tomorrow wrong,
yes, that is important.
It will not take more than 2 or 3 minutes time.
So what happens is all that. So I see people with long nails, with everything. I don't believe in all those things. You know, you have to have a surgeon's fingers with short nails, and things have to be followed properly, because we don't have the time to sit and scrub when you have to do 50 surgeries and all. So some basic things, and scrubbing and the correct scrubbing, the correct wearing of gloves and removing gloves in between cases. All that is very important. Not using a single trolley for many cases, just piling on everything and just taking from there. So small points where problems have occurred.
And ma'am, changing gloves for every case or every 2-3 cases?
No.
Every case.
Every case. It is absolutely mandatory. Nothing. See, that nothing should go from one case to the other. Nothing. Okay. So gown, see, people say that you should change gown after a few cases. I agree. But it should be, because, see, we change gowns after a few cases, right? But, you know, you see people, I don't know whether you can see me, they stand like this. See, now the thing is that if you know the process of autoclaving, gowns and linen are autoclaved at a different temperature, because if you autoclave them at the temperature of instruments, the kapda will burn. So whenever you are not changing a gown and you change the gloves, once you wear a gown, you are not supposed to touch the gown anywhere. So you are supposed to keep your hands separate, and that's all it's going to touch. So if you don't touch the gown, then it's okay. And otherwise also you should not touch the gown or the green cloth, because the autoclaving temperature of the linen is very different from that. So that is why using disposable drapes with pouches above the green cloth with no seepage. So all that is extremely important.
I agree with Dr. Ragini. We should change. I written also in my talk. The gown should be changed after every 4 to 5 cases. We can't change it after every case.
But it should not be touched. You should not be touching your gown. Correct, sir. Very
true. You should avoid unnecessary touching the gown.
Very true.
Right. So now, without further ado, I would request Dr. Anshika to please introduce Dr. Ragini for our next talk.
Thank you, sir. So we welcome our next speaker this evening, Dr. Ragini Parekh. She has been the HOD of ophthalmology at JJ Hospital, Mumbai. She has performed over 1 lakh surgeries under the guidance of Dr. T.P. Lahania, Director of...
Less than 1 lakh, 75,000.
75,000, yes, ma'am, very close. And she was selected as one of India's 100 women achievers this year, making her one of the only 5 women to be picked from the field of health and welfare. We welcome
Thank you.
Her.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, I've gone to conclusion. I was just checking. Can you just give me a minute? I'll start from the beginning. Okay, so medico-legal aspects of endophthalmitis, okay? So basically, we've conducted inquiry into a lot of, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what happens if you have an ENDOPH, or what happens when you have a medico-legal problem? So when disaster strikes, do not panic. That's the most important thing, because all the mistakes, because you may panic and you may hide the ENDOPH, you may tell some patient something wrong. So first of all, if something has happened, if there's a death on table, if the patient has died, so just don't panic, relax, sit back, and then think what is to be done. Check your priorities. that what is your first priority, patient care and then administrative matters. So these are two different things. Dr. Hitesh Bhai has already talked about it. You have to divide the two, and you have to see to it that these two run parallelly. Talk to the patients and relatives. This is exactly what has been going on for the last 1 hour. Be patient, tell the truth, be there. You cannot run away, isolate the patient. So if you have a patient of endophthalmitis and the other patients are good, separate the patient, otherwise there will be a lot of panic, and start treatment immediately. So what about the administrative and the medico-legal matters? So if you have, the rule is that if you have one endophthalmitis and it's a case where there is nothing wrong and there may be a patient factor, you found out what has happened, it was a complicated surgery, patient was diabetic, everybody else was fine, then there is no need. But if you have a cluster endoff, if you have more than two, it is mandatory that you inform the health authorities. So it's extremely important. After you have informed, you have to submit a daily progress report on the patients and the measures taken. This is also very important. You have to call the experts. So the expert basically in ophthalmology should be your friend. Somebody who's a shoulder to cry on, somebody who's an expert. So supposing if you are a cataract surgeon and if you have an endoff, then you have to call a vitreoretinal surgeon. So ophthalmology, microbiology for a second opinion, moral support, and as a neutral expert. So you need a second opinion. If you have taken a second opinion, it's very, very important with respect to the medico-legal aspect. And this happened to me and I have taken an expert opinion. Okay, shut down the theater till the cause is found and rectify if you have a cluster. And before the OT closes, send samples of solutions, IOLs with batch numbers, and therefore documentation is very necessary. When you have used something, you should not discard it the same. And so you, like in our OT, we have registers where batch number of everything from syringes to solutions, like starting from betadine, xylocaine, paracaine, everything is maintained and it is mandatory. You have to send swabs from the theater to the microbiologist, find the cause and rectify it, okay? So the cause, if you track back, it could be the patient, the surgeon, or the theater. Then possible sources could be airborne, not very likely. Solutions and medications we've seen, say for example, we've seen Avastin causing endoff, okay? Or somewhere where we've seen viscoelastic causing TAS. It could be tissues, okay? So the patient tissues, patient who has a mucocele, a dacryocystitis has been missed. Objects and materials. So, once we were packing drapes for a camp and I sit down and personally pack them because we do around 2,000 surgeries. And once we had packed around 200 drapes, somehow or the other we had to open and we found that some of them were not completely sealed. So if there was a problem with the objects and the materials that you are using, not autoclaved, ETO'd, not sanitized, sterilized. So there have been cases where the phaco tubings have not been autoclaved properly. So objects and materials and their autoclaving is important. Respiratory origin, there have been instances where in cases of infection, organisms have been traced to the respiratory tract of certain OT personnel. Surface origin, like from the skin. Air conditioning systems are very, very important. So cleaning, maintaining documentation is important. So solutions and medication is irrigation solutions. There were times when, you need to check the ringer before it is used. It has to be checked in light in such a way that you can see floating particles. And there have been documentation of fungi, ointments. I know of people who have called up crying saying, yeah, OT staff has used an expired lens and the box was given to the patient and then there is no escape from it. Instrument disinfectants, like, there was a diagram shown of Chittel's forceps. They are no longer to be used because they are no longer, you cannot use anything with Chittel's forceps. Your hands have to be sterile. You have to use gloves while using any instruments. Skin antiseptics. We have betadine solutions, 500 ml bottle. And I saw somebody pressing the swab on the bottle. So the mouth is always not clean and I told them it has to be poured. And I see people who open syringes like this on the trolley. And I know a lovely video from Arvind where they have seen how many particles fall down. So although you have to open the cover outside and the syringe has to be pulled by the person who is washed up. So small things matter. Viscoelastic intracameral drugs. I'm always scared of using different intracameral drugs with respect to asepsis. Skin of the hands, skin of the operative field, lid margins, lashes, conjunctival sac, lacrimal sac, and nasal mucosa. So there was an incident of endophthalmitis where one patient had dacryocystitis, sac syringing was done. The same cannula was used. I will be documenting it later. Objects and materials. We know all these objects and materials like tonometers, magnets, drapes, mask, gown, rubber gloves, bulbs, droppers, glass syringes, needles, bottles. Nothing should be reused. Phaco tubings have been the cause of endorphs recently, and because they are used multiple times, you do not have that many sets. Multiple cluster endorphs have occurred. IOLs, like I told you, expired IOLs, sutures. Okay, so these are all objects and materials. So what are the vital clues? Now, when you are going back and thinking that, okay, now I have an infection, what do you do? So number of patients affected, whether it is random, same OT table, conventional or phaco, re-examine, go back and assess all the patients. So what went wrong? I'll just give you an example that there were 59 patients, 31 got affected. There was one patient with a sac infection. So this was in a rural area. Somebody operated and only one cannula was used for sac syringing. And that patient was infected and everybody got infected. Another case, a gynac OT was used. And so, of course, only a patient with phaco, whether it was the phaco or whether it was a gynac OT, so either of the two. Again, the phaco tubing in this case where only the phaco patients were operated. So the phaco tubings, if they are not clean. Now in the COVID period when our operation theaters were shut because we were COVID centers and our residents were doing COVID duties, routine ophthalmic OT was shut. But that the whole time, maybe it was 3 months or 6 months, our phaco tubing with or without surgery were autoclaved and cleaned every day. So if you are not using a phaco and if you're not using a tubing, and if it is not being cleaned properly with the residual material, they are very good culture materials. So we used to have reactions in some patients, and we found out that was the first phaco and there was some residual water. The minute we started emptying some water during the first phaco and changing the person who cleaned the phaco, we stopped having a reaction. So you have to think, you have to assess, you have to evaluate. So every time we write that this was the first phaco tubing used, first case, second case. So you have to document everything in order to evaluate. Another case where common prostate surgery was done and E. coli was found. So theaters have to be dedicated. I know of very big hospitals in Mumbai where somebody had called me up and asked me that we don't have a dedicated theater. What do we do? So I said, please do not join the hospital, even if they are paying you crores, because you will be in trouble and then they don't save you. Pseudomonas was found because the OT was not prepared and not sterilized. 11 patients operated, 6 affected. The affected patients were complicated surgeries. 20 patients operated, Citrobacter was found. Now this patient, I had gone to investigate, and the soap case, the same organism was found in the soap case. People were washing hands after bathroom and washing up with the same soap. No bar soap should be used, and it should be only, only liquid soap. So it's extremely important that, because the soap cases are never clean and all that. So even if you have dispensers, there was a dispenser in my room which was not cleaned, and I told the sister to throw it off, because dispensers, the boxes of dispensers also have to be cleaned, and you have to remember that the pinkies have to be cleaned. So these are very, very important. So in one case, Pseudomonas was found and the same pair of gloves were used. So from one patient, it was transmitted. Okay, so methyl cellulose was, so what do you get? You get an infected sac, non-sterile OT, unclean phaco tubes, unsterile instruments, infected soap case, intraocular viscoelastic was a problem. So these are simple causes. They are definitely rectifiable. So you can prevent such disorders by correcting the patient factors, theater and personnel, hygiene, lacrimal sac. I think this has all been discussed by Satanshu Mathur sir. So all this hygiene, lacrimal sac, lids, dedicated, isolated OT fumigation, all this. So this is the same as what he discussed. So I won't repeat it again. So all these things, are very, very, very important and imperative. So he's already discussed this. Personnel, he has discussed. So basically, prevention is better than cure. Due diligence, proper precautions can prevent disorders. So it's very important. And what we notice in the consumer cases that come to us are that there is a lot of negligence, in the sense, I'm not saying negligence, but no consent is taken, or a person who was diabetic was given steroids, and then, the patient didn't have anything. But because they were given 60 milligram steroids, and the patient was admitted 1 month later for some medical cause, but they are blaming the ophthalmologist, saying that steroid was given. So basically, you have to be very, very careful. And you have to document everything. If there's a complication, you cannot run away from it. You have to tell the patient. So it's extremely important. So I think that you have to be careful. You have to prevent everything, which is extremely important. Thank you so much. Thank you, IRSI, and Pooja for this wonderful seminar.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is really, really valuable, because, these are the small points that we don't realize, but which are very, very important, like changing the soap bar, or, the dispensing soap that needs to be altered frequently. And, it's very, very important.
So for example, like I can use only Dettol. I cannot use the Sani scrub because I'm allergic. So they always ask me, should we get a refill pack? So I tell them, don't get the refill pack because the bottle will not be. It's expensive, but take a small quantity bottle and discard it. So small things have to be looked into, and it's a way of life. You have to get used to. So like we do have in slippers and out slippers, and I have to correct. And you have to be very careful with what your anesthetists are doing too. They will sit with the mask down. You are sitting inside. They will go out without slippers, out clothes. They will not change, go out, eat, come back. So you have to have control over everybody who's inside the theater with you, not only yourself.
Ma'am, I wish we had these teachings and this chapter or subject in our MS Ophthal training period as well. Because we don't realize, like we sometimes be like, okay, this is normal, but it's not. Even our teachers don't teach us the correct way, probably because even they don't know the proper medical legal aspect.
In fact, let me tell you, Pooja, the first lecture I take as an orientation for my residents is infection control. Like we start from saying that when you take the vision, see, I know some years back that when there is florid conjunctivitis in Mumbai, like while taking vision, the whole post-op had conjunctivitis. So you have to learn to tell them from the beginning and teaching vision that if the patient's eye is red, so sometimes an optometrist doesn't differentiate from a red eye from subconjunctivitis. But we tell them that if their eye is red, you have to come and show the patient. The patient, in our case, goes to a separate building. That is the eye bank, which is now used as a septic ward. We don't even allow the patient. We do not allow any maggot patient to enter our facility. We are a general hospital, tertiary care, so we do have patients with maggots, but no maggots are allowed to be treated or operated even in a septic theater. They go to the ENT OT and we go there and operate, but the patient is not allowed to enter our facility at all. So small points which are very important, but
so glad that we had you on our. So glad that we have all of y'all on our panel, so that we learn something and implement something and pass on the message to all the young people who are starting out now. We move on to our next speaker, Dr. Saurabh Luthra. He's the Director of Vitreoretinal Services at Drishti Eye Institute. He has pursued his VR fellowship from the University of California, Irvine, USA. He has been an invited speaker in national and international conferences and wowed us with his skillful surgical videos. Dr. Luthra joins us to give his wisdom on how to differentiate between TAS, hypopyon, and how to exactly know that you're dealing with a case of endophthalmitis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Pooja, and I hope my slides are visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I thank IRSI, Dr. Mehta, sir, Dr. Vinod Arora, sir, and the youthful wing of IRSI, Pooja, Rohan, Anshika, for this opportunity. I'll be speaking on hypopyon in the first week after cataract surgery, a cataract surgeon's perspective, and why it should not be taken lightly. So the incidence of endophthalmitis is in post-cataract is about 0.07 to 0.5%. Post-PK, it's about 0.11. Post-vitrectomy, 0.05%. And bleb-related endophthalmitis is seen in 0.2 to 0.6% cases. Traumatic is about 2.4 to 8%. Most common organisms responsible for endophthalmitis are the gram-positive bacteria in 75 to 85% cases. In 10 to 15% cases, it's a gram-negative bacteria, and fungus is not very common. Presenting symptoms and signs, patient presents with symptoms most commonly on the second day after surgery. They may be decreased vision, pain, photophobia, congestion, hazy cornea, AC reaction with or without hypopyon, reduced or absent fundal glow, vitritis, exudates over the retina. Others may be lid swelling, discharge, and chemosis. So we have to see what is the initial visual acuity for prognostic significance, what is the ocular motility like, whether eyelid is swollen, whether there is any blepharospasm, conjunctival hyperemia, chemosis, bleb examination, cornea, if it is edematous, whether there is any opacification, DM folds, KPs, infiltrates, or there is any occult penetration, AC for cells, flare, fibrinous exudates, and hypopyon. Vitreous should be seen for vitritis, exudates. Fundus should be seen whether the red reflex is present or absent, whether there is any associated papillitis, whether there are any white lesions in the retina and choroid, whether there are any retinal hemorrhages and periphlebitis, what is the IOP like, and signs of any penetrating injuries and IOFBs. Three forms of clinical presentation can be distinguished. Acute form, which is usually fulminant, occurs 2 to 4 days post-op, most commonly due to Staph aureus or strep. Delayed form, moderately severe, occurs 7 to 10 days post-op due to Staph epidermidis, coagulase negative cocci, rarely fungal. And chronic form, which is as early as 1 month post-op due to P. acnes and Staph epidermidis or fungal. So these are the pictures of the presentation, where you can see in the first figure, vitreous exudates with poor glow. In figure 2, a case of traumatic endophthalmitis with hypopyon. In figure 3, you can see a hypopyon in a case of endophthalmitis. And in figure 4, a chronic delayed endophthalmitis with sequestration of P. acnes in the capsular bag. So what is the role of ultrasound? It plays a crucial role in establishing diagnosis in cases of hazy media and helps in monitoring response to treatment. The findings which can be noted are vitreous membranes and opacities, anatomical status of the retina and ONH, extent of inflammation, associated choroidal detachment, whether any IOB is present, and to look for retained lens material. So this is what you may see in a case of endophthalmitis, where in this case you can see significant exudates in the vitreous cavity, which are low to moderate reflective and clump-like, and retina is attached and there is thickening of the choroid. What are the mimicking conditions? So TAS is one of the mimicking conditions. It is seen after complicated prolonged surgery, if there's pre-existing uveitis, if there's retained lens matter, or if there's any associated ocular injury with inflammation. Presence of significant vitritis usually goes in favor of infectious endophthalmitis till proven otherwise. So how to differentiate TAS from infectious endophthalmitis? TAS usually occurs in 12 to 24 hours, whereas infectious endophthalmitis is 2 to 7 days. Pain can be mild to moderate in TAS, whereas it is usually severe in infectious endophthalmitis. Pressure there can be a sudden increase in pressure in TAS, whereas in infectious endophthalmitis may be normal or elevated. AC inflammation may be moderate to severe in TAS, and there can be hypopyon which may be present, whereas in infectious endophthalmitis, there can be moderate to severe reaction, fibrin is variable, and hypopyon is often present. Vitritis is usually absent in TAS, whereas it is always present in infectious endophthalmitis. Lid swelling is not evident in TAS, whereas it is present in infectious endophthalmitis. Visual acuity is decreased in both. And corneal edema is very characteristically limbus to limbus in TAS, whereas it is less marked in infectious endophthalmitis. And the treatment of choice for TAS is steroids, where we can see a dramatic improvement, whereas it is equivocal in infectious endophthalmitis. So these are pictures of acute endophthalmitis with hypopyon, a chronic saccular endophthalmitis, and on the right side, you can see pictures of TAS with limbus to limbus corneal edema. What are the late findings in TAS? There can be endothelial damage, atonic pupil, iris transillumination defects. There can be TM damage and secondary glaucoma. Etiology is usually intraocular irrigating solutions, pH or ionic composition abnormality, osmolarity issues, particulate contamination, or endotoxin contamination. Also, preservatives in ophthalmic solutions like BAK, bisulfite, and EDTA can lead to TAS. Also, medication dilution errors, intraocular medication dilution errors, where antibiotics in irrigation bottle, intracameral anesthetics, or intracameral antibiotics. Also, topical ointment with access to anterior chamber can give rise to TAS. Sterilization of instruments and tubing, detergents and enzyme residues, endotoxin contamination of ultrasound baths, impurities in the autoclave system. Also, ophthalmic viscosurgical devices like denatured sterilized remnant OVD in reusable cannulas or handpieces. So in the 2005 ASCRIS study, the TAS was found to have these causes: inadequate flushing of phaco and IA handpieces, use of enzymatic cleaners, reuse of single-use products, antibiotics in BSS, preserved epinephrine, inappropriate agents for skin prep, and powdered gloves. So what is the treatment of TAS? Intense topical corticosteroids, management of intraocular pressure, and close follow-up to rule out infectious etiology. Prognosis: mild, it shows rapid improvement to normal, and in moderate 3 to 6 weeks for clearing with endothelial cell reduction, and severe, there can be corneal edema, chronic inflammation with CME, atonic pupil, and persistent glaucoma. So what is the role of intravitreal injections? Any case where there is clinical suspicion of endophthalmitis, where vision is more than hand motions, VR facilities are not available in the vicinity when you want to buy time till VR intervention is available, or at the completion of vitrectomy. It's the mainstay of management strategy. Systemic antibiotics do not reach the intravitreal pathogens in sufficient concentration because of the blood-retinal barrier. Intravitreal injections bypass this barrier. What is the ideal agent? It is effective against offending organisms. It is non-toxic to retina in bactericidal doses. Its appropriate half-life within the vitreous to be effective. It is injected prior to the irreversible destruction of the retina, and it is easily available and cost-effective. So for gram-positive cocci, vancomycin is the preferred drug. Cefazolin can also be used, whereas for gram-positive bacilli, vancomycin is the preferred drug. For gram-negative cocci and bacilli, ceftazime is the preferred drug, whereas amikacin and gentamicin are not so commonly used because of macular toxicity issues. For fungus, amphotericin B was used before, but nowadays voriconazole is the drug of choice. These are some of the recommended intravitreal drug dosages. And it's always very nice to have this handy chart. This one is available from CIPLA, where you can see the commonly used intravitreal antibiotics with their concentrations and how to prepare them. Also, this Orolab e-kit is commonly available, where, in case of emergency, this has all the, injections, vancomycin, ceftazidime, voriconazole, along with all the syringes and needles you need for giving intravitreal injections. So one can keep this handy in the clinic. So what are the principles of intravitreal injection? Surgeon injecting must prepare the solution himself. There should be a printed reference paper. There should be aseptic precautions. OPD or OT setup can be used. Informed consent should be taken. Wound integrity should be looked into. Suture abscesses and IOP should also be taken into account. Prepare the solution for injection in separate tuberculin syringes with 30 gauge needle. Use topical anesthetic drops. Apply povidone iodine. Drape with a night towel and a lid speculum. AC tap or vitreous tap should be done. Site of the injection infratemporal quadrant is preferred. 3 millimeters away from the limbus in aphakics or pseudophakics, and 3.5 millimeter in phakics. Stabilize with a cotton tipped applicator and send sample for direct smear and cytology, gram stain, culture sensitivity, and KOH preparation for fungus. Do AC wash to decrease the toxic load. Reinforce the section if leakage is there. Check IOP. Send the sample to lab. Entry with a 30 gauge needle through pars plana to reach the mid vitreous cavity. Bevel of the needle should be pointing away from the macula or facing anteriorly. Inject the antibiotic into vitreous cavity drop by drop, and second injection should be given with a different syringe. So these are some of the results we have after intravitreal injections, where you can see after intracameral and intravitreal injection and AC wash after 4 months, this is the picture you have on the bottom right. So what is the definition of improvement? If there's improvement of vision, reduction or disappearance of hypopyon, clearing of the AC, consolidation of the fibrin exudates or shrinking of the pupillary membrane, better red reflex, reduction of pain and decrease in lid edema. So this is again a case after 2 days of intravitreal injection and after 1 week showing very good clearing with vision of 6.6. Slit lamp photo at presentation on the top right, and on the bottom left, you can see slit lamp photo taken at 8 weeks after intravitreal injection. There are ESCRS guidelines for prevention and treatment of endophthalmitis, which was a very good article in 2013. Some of the newer intravitreal antibiotics are meropenem, imipenem, tazobactam, ciprofloxacin, linezolid, cefuroxime, and trovafloxacin. So I'll just end with one case. It's a 77-year-old male presented with temporal field defect for 20 days in the right eye. Vision was 618. In the left eye, and vision was 618 in the right eye, 6-9 parts in the left. Left eye had a nasal macula on RD. Patient was a diabetic. So you can see here that in the left eye, there is a nasal retinal detachment. Patient underwent phacoemulsification with vitrectomy with encerclage and oil insertion. And on the first post-op day, vision was 612 parts. However, the pressure was 42 millimeters. There was corneal edema, striate keratopathy, small silicon oil bubble in AC, retina was on. Patient was treated with taplet, acetazolamide, and frequent steroids and antibiotics and cycloplegics and topical anti-glaucoma drugs. On the 5th post-op day, vision was 660. It had gone down. There was no pain and photophobia. Pressure had gone down to 30. There was still lid edema and corneal haze and SK. Hypopyon was there at this point of time, which was 5th post-operative day. Silicon oil bubble in the AC had become bigger and AC was shallow. Retina was on under silicon oil. Topical steroids were increased to 1 hourly, and a YAG PI was done in the left eye. This is the 5th post-op day picture. You can see on the slit lamp that there is a hypopyon and a silicon oil bubble in AC with SK. And on OCT, the left eye retina was on under silicon oil. 10 days post-op, vision went down to 1/60. There was corneal haze which had increased, the SK had increased, and the hypopyon was resolving at this time. At this point of time, we added systemic steroids and augmentin, and also topical atropine with fortified vancomycin. 3 weeks post-op, vision was still 2/60. The pressures had normalized, but there was a big silicon oil bubble in AC. But at this point, hypopyon had resolved. The media was still hazy. After 5 weeks, the vision was finger counting close to phase. There was minimal corneal edema, and there was KPs, no hypopyon. Silicon oil bubble in AC was there, and exudates were seen behind the IOL, and there was no view. So this is what the patient looked like at 5 weeks post VR surgery, where you can see that there are exudates visible behind the IOL, and there is this, the AC is quiet, but there is a silicon oil bubble in the AC. So the patient underwent silicon oil removal with air fluid exchange. And first post-op day, post silicon oil removal, you can see the vision was hand motion close to phase, the pressure was fine, retina was on, but it was an air-filled eye. And 10 days post SOR, the vision was finger counting close to phase. The OCT showed an on retina, but there was a fibrin membrane over IOL with iris Bombay, and patient underwent a YAG capsulotomy and membranectomy. And 2 weeks post SOR, the vision improved to 624 parts, and AC was quiet with the visual axis clear and retina was on. So this was basically an inflammatory hypopyon post VR surgery because of the silicon oil bubble, most likely in the anterior chamber, which was, causing some irritation. And especially when the patient was, lying down, it would, kind of irritate the corneal endothelium and give rise to inflammation. So only after silicon oil removal did, the patient settle down. But this was fortunately not an, infectious hypopyon. And the clue to this was that there was no pain and photophobia, and patient was fairly comfortable. And the hypopyon resolved after silicon oil removal. So I'll just end with this last few slides, that we know that intracameral antibiotics have become popular. And initially, when in 2016, it was described, where hemorrhagic occlusive retinal vasculitis was described, because of vancomycin. And now Dr. Chang, who kind of advocated this initially, and he moved on to moxifloxacin to avoid this, horrendous complication of intraocular vancomycin. And following that, there were major studies planned, and especially by Dr. Arvind Haripriya's group, and in which they've shown that intracameral moxifloxacin reduces the post-operative endophthalmitis rate overall in cases of phacoemulsification with MSICS and also in eyes with PC rent. And later on, her group has also done studies where, in patients who needed re-surgery following primary cataract surgery, eyes having a breach in the posterior capsule requiring vitrectomy and taken for re-surgery as secondary eye implantation were having an increased risk of endophthalmitis, and post-treatment visual outcomes were favorable, in her series. And also recently, this intracameral moxifloxacin has been hailed as one of the very good, kind of methods which was analyzed and investigated by Dr. Arvind Haripriya's group at Madurai. And it was one of the 3 organizations apart from Kaiser in the US and one association in Sweden, which have adopted this intracameral moxifloxacin. So what is the carry home message? Timely diagnosis and treatment of post-op endophthalmitis can save most of such eyes. Endophthalmitis once suspected, cataract surgeon should start patient on conservative treatment with intravitreal injection of antibiotics and send the patient to your friendly VR surgeon for further management. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That there is an endophthalmitis and then straight away go ahead and give it before referring to a VR surgeon? Is that how we should go ahead?
So yeah, so if the vision, if you have VR backup and if the vision is and it is only PL vision, then sometimes it may be an indication. It may be a fulminant endophthalmitis that you're dealing with, and according to the EVS study, those patients did better if they underwent early vitrectomy, and that is what should be followed. But yes, if you don't have VR backup, then you can give intravitreal injections to buy time. But more than hand motions vision, with finger counting vision, I think first attempt should be made to give intravitreal antibiotics and try to kind of manage conservatively, and only if there are signs of worsening, then you should plan for a vitrectomy.
2 things are more important, Rohan. You all should know anti-cataract segment surgeon. The intravitreal injection should be done by each and everyone. In SSTC, we are teaching the intravitreal injection. I'm no surprised to see even person of my age are not knowing how to give the intravitreal injection. So intravitreal injection should be learned by each and everyone. Number 1 thing. And second, most important thing between vision and no vision is the timely reference to the VR surgeon. If you give the intravitreal injection, no improvement, immediately refer the patient to the nearest VR surgeon without any hesitation. This is very important.
I think I fully agree with that. And, so intravitreal injections actually in the time of anti-VEGF era that we are in, most, ophthalmologists do know how to give intravitreal injections because, a lot of people are practicing medical retina. So I think that's a good thing that has happened that, with the anti-VEGF era, people do know how to give intravitreal injections and can manage endophthalmitis in its primary stage or the milder cases, by giving intravitreal injections.
Right. Dr. Mehta, sir, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think very important. One of the things you could circulate, Rohan, is the dosage of the antibiotic which has to be given intravitreal and how do you prepare. That is something which might help people to, in the crisis, to keep it in the OT.
Right. So that's the one that...
what is the dosage to be given?
Yeah, that's the one that's supplied by Cipla. I think it's there in our OT. And it's very popular because it was there in our hospital during PG also. That's the one that is followed and that has been prepared in conjunction with AIOS. So that the Cipla guideline, that chart that is there, that should be present in all rooms. That's one thing that we'll definitely be circulating.
Yeah, because this should be there, black and white, stuck on the wall. Because when there is panic, you don't know what to do. And the first thing is panic. And second, as Dr. Saurabh said so correctly, at the first sign with the VR surgeon, basically that's the first thing that has to be done. You have to share it with the VR surgeon. And latest doses of meropenem, we are not used to. The ICU guys are used to meropenem. Our people are not used to using meropenem, how to obtain. So those doses also, if you could circulate, it will be there in the OT. You don't have to struggle for it last minute.
Sure. Yes. Right.
Thanks, Saurabh. Wonderful talk. Excellent results. All those just burns your heart. You see those membranes underneath the iris, above the iris, below the cornea, in front of the lens, behind the lens. My God, it just hurts you. And when the patient comes late, the sclera is so fragile, you can't even take a suture. It just bursts off. So it's just a nightmare that nobody wants to go through in life.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much for a
Thank you.
very
Thank you so
enlightening
much.
talk.
Thank you so much, everyone. We are so glad to get such pearls of wisdom from our pioneers and so many tips and tricks from the esteemed speakers. We will see you next month now, back for chapter 14, which is going to be on social security for ophthalmologists, where we're going to talk about insurance along with the FBA iOS scheme. We would also like to thank our Microvision team, Mr. Ashok and Mr. Navneet, for all their help at the back end to run this event so smoothly. Thank you and see you all next month. Good night.